Hey, Jim Wolf here with dating advice for men who love women. So what should you do when you're having your first conversation with a woman, or you're on your first or second date with her, and the conversation goes a little stale, or it starts to feel boring, or you're not sure what to say next, or there's kind of an awkward pause in the conversation? How should you handle it when you feel like you're stuck in a conversation with a woman? Well, first of all, we have another presentation on this channel called How to Talk to Women. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't already. And then in this presentation, I'm going to go over 3 quick tips that can help you whenever you feel like you're stuck in a conversation with a woman. And these 3 tips are very practical because when you're sitting there with a woman and you're in your head trying to figure out what to say next, you need something practical that you can pull out that will actually help you. And so these 3 tips will help you when you're actually in that situation with a woman. And that's what we want, because just thinking about a situation is much different than when you're actually in it. So these 3 tips are going to help you when you're actually in there talking to a woman. And that's what's great about these 3 tips. So what should you do when you're sitting there talking to a woman and you're actually in this situation? Well, first of all, be comfortable with silence. From now on, there's no such thing as an awkward silence. There's only awesome silence. Now that might sound strange to you, but seriously, there's no such thing as an awkward silence unless you make it awkward. If you are comfortable with a pause in the conversation, then she'll feel comfortable with it too. So you want to start feeling comfortable with pauses in your conversation with a woman. And think about it like this. When you're hanging out with one of your friends, it's not that big of a deal if you just sit next to each other for a few seconds without talking, or a few minutes. It's not a big deal to have a silence in a conversation. And here's another thing. If both of you feel comfortable sitting there in silence together, that implies a deep level of rapport. So a lot of guys are always asking me, how do I get rapport with a woman? How do I have a deep connection with a woman? Well, one of the ways that you can start building that connection is just being comfortable sitting there with her without talking. Because again, that implies a deep level of rapport that's already there. You don't have to try to get it. You don't have to work for it. It's just there. It's assumed and implied. And if you're talking to a woman and there's a little pause and you're just relaxed and sitting back and kind of enjoying being there with her, that implies that deep level of rapport. And now you have a stronger connection with her. So this can actually be a good thing. It's definitely much better than being in your head worried about it and trying to think of the next perfect thing to say. And that's another important point. If you're in your head trying to think of the next most awesome thing that you can possibly say, then you're trying to impress her. And you already have a mindset that's making it harder for you. Because if you're trying to impress her, that's an approval-seeking behavior, which she interprets as neediness, and neediness kills female attraction. And honestly, she'll be much more impressed if you sit back a little bit and let her talk. Encourage her to share a lot about herself and her life with you. We want her to talk 60 to 80% of the time. So instead of you being in your head trying to come up with the best possible things that you can say to make her like you, sit back a little bit, ask her open-ended questions, let her talk for the most part, and then share a few things about yourself back a little bit less than she shares with you. Not only is that less work for you and less pressure, it also actually makes her more impressed with you. So start being more comfortable with silence and let her talk more. And that's going to go a long way to not feeling like you're stuck in a conversation with a woman. And one way that you can practice this if you want to try it is for the next week or two, whenever you're talking to someone, after they finish saying what they wanted to say, pause for 3 to 5 seconds before you start talking. And if you'll try this, what you'll probably find out is that the other person actually has more to share. And maybe they will restart the conversation and start talking more. And when you do that with a woman, if you wait 3 seconds before you respond to what she said, a lot of times she will restart the conversation. And that's great because a woman who likes you will help you. She'll help you move the conversation along. She'll help you figure out when both of you can meet up with each other. When a woman likes you, she will help you, including with the conversation. So let her talk and let her help you with the conversation a little bit. And I'm not saying that you put all of this on her. You still want to lead the conversation where you want it to go. And again, we talk about that in the How to Talk to Women presentation. However, on the other hand, be a little more laid back about having to immediately say something as soon as she's done talking. You don't have to do that at all. So find a way to start being more comfortable with silence in all of your conversations. And then the second thing that you can do is have a go-to conversational game that you can pull out anytime you think the conversation is starting to get boring. This is something that I love to do, not only on a date, but with my friends and colleagues and whoever it is. This is really fun. This makes conversation less logical and less boring, and that's what we want, because your connection with a woman has nothing to do with logic, has nothing to do with facts, or boring informational style topics. Your connection with a woman is based on the emotions that both of you are feeling and the vibe that you're creating together. And so if you have a fun conversational game that you enjoy in your back pocket that you can pull out anytime, in a situation where you feel like things are getting a little stale, you can just pull that out and keep the conversation moving along. And to give you an example of this, my favorite conversational game goes like this. First, you say something like, okay, I have a question for you. And then you say, if you could be any animal, what would you be and why? And then you let her answer. And that can be the end of it if you want, or you can continue. And so the next thing that you could say is, oh, interesting. Well, if you couldn't be that animal, what animal would you be and why? And then let her answer. And then when she's finished answering, you can say, all right, great. This is the last one, I promise. If you couldn't be either of those first two animals, what animal would you be and why? And then let her answer. And then when she's finished answering, you can say, do you want me to tell you what those things mean? And usually she'll say like, yeah, tell me, please. And then you can tell her, okay, so the first one is who you think you are. It's how you see yourself. The second one is how other people see you. And then the last one is who you really are. Now, I've never had a group of women or a woman by herself of any age not enjoy this kind of conversational game. Unless she's in a super horrible mood or something like that. And even a lot of men enjoy playing these kind of conversational games if you bring it up. But especially on a date with a woman, this kind of conversational game can be really fun because it cuts the tension and builds your connection with her in a fun and playful way and creates positive emotions instead of you trying to convince her to like you or just talking about boring informational topics. So I highly encourage you to find a conversational game like this that you enjoy, that you can pull out anytime you feel like a conversation is getting stale or you just want to have fun with a woman. Because remember, love is light and playful. It's not serious no matter what society says. Love is light and playful. And it's your job to create that light and playful environment with a woman that you're dating. And this is one really great way that you can do it that also helps you whenever you're stuck in a conversation with a woman. And then lastly, the third thing that you can do is prepare some fun topics and interesting questions in advance. Now, this is something that I actually learned all the way back in 7th grade, because back in middle school, I had a friend named Aaron. And one late afternoon, I was on my way to one of those middle school dances where the boys stand on one side of the gym and the girls stand on the other side of the gym and nobody really talks to each other and everyone's just kind of waiting to see if anyone's going to make a move or not. So I was heading to this middle school dance with my friend Aaron in the back of his parents' minivan, and he was telling me, hey, let's come up with some topics now that we can talk to these girls about, so when we start talking to them, we won't feel so nervous. And then we started brainstorming what we were going to talk about with the girls when we got to the dance. And I'll never forget that moment because it's brilliant advice, whether you're on your way to a middle school dance or you're 37 years old and on your way to your first date with a woman, or you're 86 years old and you're talking to a woman. So I highly encourage you to brainstorm some topics that you think are fun and some open-ended questions that you think are interesting right now or before you go on your next date with a woman, so that when you feel like there's a pause in the conversation, you can just pull out one of these questions or one of these topics and keep the conversation moving forward. So this is something that you can do to prepare for that situation before it ever happens. And then if you have 5 or 6 fun topics in your back pocket, you can just pull one out whenever you need it. And if you have 5 or 6 interesting questions in your back pocket as well, then things really keep moving along in a conversation. And so here are a few examples of some fun topics so that we can get this process started right now. Fun topics could include funny or fun stories from childhood, like the story I just told you, experiences you've had while traveling, her passions and hobbies, and your passions and hobbies. And when you talk about passions and hobbies, you want to let her talk about hers a little more than you talk about yours, but you can also share your passions and hobbies with her a little bit. Anything related to pop culture, celebrity gossip, observations about the environment around you, like, hey, why is everyone in here wearing black? Or something like that. Anything that you're genuinely curious about, anything interesting that you've learned recently and want to share, or really anything that you think is interesting. Because if you're talking about something with enthusiasm, she's going to feel that enthusiasm, and it's automatically going to make it a little more interesting for her. So even if you're passionate about math, let's say, if you talk about math in an excited way and you share the emotions that you're feeling in certain situations when you're applying it, then she can connect to that too. And if you bring up a certain topic and she doesn't seem very into it, feel free to just switch the topic at any time, even if you're in mid-sentence. Remember, this is not about conveying information. This is about creating emotions. So let your stories go if they're not landing. Just let it go and let the conversation flow a little more. Women tend to be really good at switching topics randomly. They can open a lot of different threads and come back to it or not. And when you're on a date with a woman, I encourage you to adopt that style a little bit. Now, again, you still want to lead the conversation forward, and we talk about that in the How to Talk to Women presentation, but don't be so linear in your conversation. If you're telling a story and you can feel that she's not really into it, switch the topic immediately, or pull out an interesting question and shift gears. And here are some examples of interesting open-ended questions that you can ask anytime. What's something you secretly want to brag about? I really like that question. If you hit the lottery jackpot and never had to work again, what would you do then and why? What's your ideal vacation and what's your ideal travel itinerary? What would your most perfect day look like? And not just one kind of like ultimate good day. If your daily life was exactly the way you wanted it to be, what would your daily life look like? Here's one of my favorites that's related to the conversational game we talked about earlier. If you could be any dinosaur, what would you be and why? I love that question. And if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would you choose and why? So those are some examples of some interesting open-ended questions that you can ask her anytime you want or when you feel like the conversation is going cold. And I encourage you to come up with your own list of open-ended questions that you think are interesting and topics that you think are interesting that you can pull out anytime you need them when you're talking to a woman. And now you have some really powerful tools to help you whenever you stall out in a conversation with a woman. And remember, dating is a two-way street. It's not just you trying to impress her or you carrying the conversation. You're only responsible for your part of the conversation, and both of you are actually trying to impress each other. So don't carry that whole burden on yourself. Lead the conversation where you want it to go, but don't force it. Let her talk as much as possible and see where she takes things. And focus on the emotions that you're creating with her more than the content of your conversation. Because again, that's what attraction and ultimately love are all about. And that means that if you create an environment where pauses in a conversation are okay, instead of living in your head trying to think of the next thing to say, both of you will feel more comfortable just being with each other. And what else happens when you're alone with a woman and you're not talking to each other? I'll just leave you with that. And if you want to attract an awesome girlfriend or wife, or you want to make sure you keep the one you already have, go grab our best-selling Attract and Keep Her system right now. Inside the Attract and Keep Her system, you'll discover exactly how to make a woman fall in love with you step by step from the first moment you meet her until you've been with her for 75 years. And you'll also discover how to make absolutely sure she never falls out of love with you. So if you haven't already, go to attractandkeepher.com/system. That's attractandkeepher.com/system and grab your copy now. And of course, as always, we have some free gifts for you as a thank you for checking out this presentation. We have some advanced free training for you, and you can get that by going to datingadviceformenwholovewomen.com. That's datingadviceformenwholovewomen.com. I'm Jim Wolf with Dating Advice for Men Who Love Women. I'll talk to you later.